Hey, this weekend has been a labor of a lot of love, and there have been some just incredible efforts and energies put in by people that aren't me to to hand you cupcakes and tell you stories and compile and celebrate the things that God has done. So can we just pause for a minute and like give it up for those people who do not want to be probably called upon to come to the stage and make speeches or anything like that. But I just am really grateful. One of the benefits, if you have it, to go on sabbatical and return is that, like, I'm just taking all of this in right along with you because I didn't plan the cupcakes and it's been really cool to be able to see and celebrate. And similarly to, as has been said, to reflect upon Just like if you think about your life in terms of decades, you're like, whoa, like a lot happens in a decade, right? And similarly to as was stated in the video, like, there's a picture the night before our church launched of my family taken by some well-wishers that had come into town, and like my kids are like sitting on my lap, like. And that dude, by the way, had no idea what he'd be spending the next 10 years doing. But like, just that smile on his face, right? Like that kid and those kids are like a decade older. Like, and this week, one of those kids got mail from colleges saying like, hey, you're ready for your next chapter. And this is just from Monday. Like this stack of competing visions of the life that is worth living. Right? The high school senior is wrestling with all of the wonderful worlds that are saying it's the quaintness of a quiet community, it's the bustle of the big city, it's the extensive programs and offerings we have, it's the fact that it doesn't cost a lot of money. And you can probably remember how like harrowing and overwhelming that process was. And probably can remember like all of the different voices throwing out to you competing visions of where life was found. Like you've got those voices your senior year of high school going, well, it's this, no, it's this, no, it's this. You've got maybe parents or your church community going, no, it's this. And you're entering on some level, some kind of point of decision to say, what will I trust to actually begin to inform where I will define a picture of the good life, whatever the good life would be, right? And like the sad reality to tell my high school senior is that you can get the essay done and you can get all the applications out and you can get your financial aid package and it actually won't solve the question for you. That you'll continue to answer that question in your 20s. You'll answer it in your 30s. You'll answer it in your 40s. I've been told you'll be thinking about it in your 50s and your 60s and your 70s as well. Like we will always be thinking and challenged by like differing, competing visions of what is a life worth living. What is a picture of success? And this is true for churches too, right? As we reflect on 10 years, like what is the metric by which you would say, this is a good church? Like, is it programs? Is it offerings? Is it the style of music? Is it the kinds of programs? These are things that we come to and we reflect on as a community together. And here's what I think is good to know when we feel that sense of overwhelm, right? Like, I don't want to drop that on my high school senior, but like, that's a reality. Like, she's going to spend the rest of her life just with less formal mail coming all at one time, thinking about this thing. And so will you, and so will I, and this is not a new conversation. This is actually part of what it means to be very human. And so when we look back at the Bible, which is one of the things we do when we come into this room, and we study these scriptures together, we can often, if we just think about our day-to-day life, we kind of go, well, there isn't always a lot of relevance for the thing I'm going through today. But I actually think the thing you're going through today, if it is in fact, what is a life worth living? How do I wrestle with the competing visions of all of these things telling me this is where life is found? Well, then I actually think the scriptures and the tensions raised in Mark chapter 10 are quite relevant for you. Jesus has just for the third time in the Gospel of Mark told a group of people walking with him, talking with him, saying basically, we'll follow you anywhere. hey, let me tell you how this is going to end. I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be killed. 3 days later, I'll rise again. Every time he says it, it doesn't land. It's like someone trying to force a joke a third time. Like, dude, it wasn't funny the first 2 times. It just does not resonate with the people who are hearing it, what it is he's actually talking about. You, who may have some kind of peripheral engagement with Christianity, even if you've never explored the claims of Jesus for yourself, might know, oh, he's talking about 3 days after his murder and execution at the hands of the state, he's going to demonstrate to Rome and to the world that can't keep him dead. Because you have some sort of sense of how the story ends, right? They do not. And so it does not land with them, even though he's done it for the 3rd time now. In fact, let me show you how much it doesn't land with them by what happens next. Okay? Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 35, Jesus has just said what I told you, and here's what the disciples do in response to this very vulnerable, open moment about how this kingdom and this definition of success is going to look. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. This is going to go well. What do you want me to do for you, he asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other of us sit in your left in glory. Verse 38, you don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup that I drink or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. But to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. When the other 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. The high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant, and whoever wants to become first must be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So these dudes, after a moment of incredible vulnerability and the attempt at a teachable moment, begin to jockey for position about like what's going to happen when we take the next hill. What's going to happen when we really stick it to Rome and we show them? What's going to happen when we tell these Jewish leaders and these tax collectors and all these officials? Like they just don't get it. And who's going to play a role? Like who gets to be who in all of this thing? What a mess. Right? Like it's easy for us to look at that with some sense of like just collective eye roll at the nonsense here. And what Jesus is so gracious in doing in this, Jesus is doing what I would not do. And by the way, I think this is one of those moments where I can point to why I think the scriptures are a reliable, like, reflection of like the things that happen. Because if I'll speak from my own part, I would probably go back to the author of Mark and be like, can we not talk about the time I did this? Can we not talk about the time that I said something really stupid because I just didn't understand in full? Just a moment that I kind of point to go, it makes me trust it just a little bit more. But at any rate, like that, beside the point, like the thing I think is interesting here is that you have these competing visions, and Jesus is matching it with a great deal of grace and patience that I would not have for these guys, to say, listen, you have pictures in your mind of success. You have pictures of life, of the good life. You have absorbed and internalized. Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. Pictures of the good life. And I'm here to tell you that, like, we're not going to do the kingdom the way the Gentiles do the kingdom. We are doing something different here. We're ushering something different here, and that's going to call to light and bring to light some really uncomfortable confrontations with yourself. Because whoever wants to be great needs to become a servant. What we've come to do, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve to give his life as a ransom for many. The way we're going to live, the way we're going to pour ourselves out has the capacity in a way that these government officials and these other pictures of success you have around you cannot, to free people from the spiritual and emotional and relational and physical captivity that they live in. We're going to live that way. And it lands for them probably like it lands for us, right? It lands, doesn't it, like a high school graduation speech? As something that's just like aspirational. Like when that young idealistic person gets up to the microphone and says something about how we can change the world if we all work together, you're like, hey, yeah, you don't know what the mortgage rates are though, son. And young lady, have you seen the price of groceries? Like, and do you know how impractical like that particular solution you're espousing is? Oh, that's cute. That's cute. But you're right. It's better to serve. It's better to serve than to not. That's kind of what we do with this, right? Because if we're honest, we really want a life where we are served, and then out of our own like autonomy and agency, like, yeah, I guess we should give back. Like we're all going to kind of want to be a Rockefeller, right? Like, yeah, we could set some foundations and whatever in our name afterwards. It'd be good. Right? What is called into collision for us and for the disciples are these competing pictures that are running in our head, that are running in our heart, that are being thrown out to us all the time of where life is found. And Jesus is saying, no, it's actually found right here. And some of the tension that we see happen is a result of just bringing this into light. I mean, this conversation creates tension, doesn't it? Because it forces us to acknowledge that we actually feel the way the disciples feel. I mean, the disciples, the other 10 get indignant, and I think a first reading of the text, you might go, that's because they're mad at James and John for saying such a thing. Like, and they might be doing their own version of that kind of like, oh, who will think of the children, right? But what I think is actually happening is that they're kind of ticked off that like someone else is trying to get theirs when they're trying to get theirs privately as well. Like they've said the quiet part out loud, which is this community that espouses to want to follow Jesus to the end has got fractures and fragments of people sort of going, yeah, but I am more or less just kind of projecting my own picture of success into what we're doing as this collective fellowship of disciples, right? So you can see amongst that early brain trust just the fracture that we probably feel in our own world, which is to say, like, okay, Scott, I'll live that way, but like no one else around me is living that way. Oh, and I'll think of church that way, but what good does it do if no one else around me thinks about church that way? Like, so great, slap it on coffee cups, but you can't live this way. And this is the tension that Jesus is inviting us to unfold. Right? This is the picture that Jesus is giving to us. So I had a friend who got interviewed for a publication of national renown, like is known nationally. And I tell you that just so that you don't think I'm going to tell you a story about, like that starts with like, well, there's this guy who was starting a podcast that reached out to my friend, and it's just a weird thing that my guy who's starting a podcast reaching out to my friend does. This is a national publication that reached out to a friend and said, hey, we want to do an interview about the state of mental health amongst pastors in the COVID-19 pandemic, and you're doing some good work in that. And he said, sure, that's good, because the state of mental health amongst pastors is not great. And so he did this, interview with this particular organization, and in the setting up of the interview, they had some very explicit instructions about how they were going to collect it. So it's still the COVID era, so they weren't coming to him. It was going to be on Zoom, recorded on Zoom, and they were like, but here's the deal, no cameras. There's no cameras here. Like, we're not going to do cameras. We're going to record it, but there's no cameras. Now, I don't know how many Zoom calls you've been on the past 3 years, but I know even out of my own mouth, I was giving the opposite advice as some kind of sound wisdom, right? That I was doing the Zoom calls where I'm like, hey, can we put our cameras on just so everyone's engaged? I just want to see everyone's faces, right? I was saying things like that. I was told that was the thing in leadership you were supposed to do. And here's what they were finding. They were like, no cameras. And he's like, why? That's the opposite of the thing I'm being told to do by my employers, by my donors, by the people. And they said, well, what we're finding is that with our cameras on, we tend to look at our own foreheads and features and start to begin to pontificate about whether or not our earlobes are the same size. And then we're also spending some time looking at what's happening in the background somewhere else and like, oh, they have a book on their shelf. I don't like that. I didn't like that book. That's a weird book. Why would you have that book in your shelf? What kind of person has a book like that on their shelf? Right? And, oh, they wrote something down. What did I say? That basically all of this like focus, this camera focus, this side-to-side obsession, like this posturing and this comparison, robs the interviewer and the interviewee of the transparency of a real conversation rooted in flourishing. And I actually think that's what's happening here. Like, what the way of Jesus is communicated, but what it's exposed here is all of the shoulder-to-shoulder ways, like these guys have not yet figured out that what Jesus is inviting them to is something better and more beautiful, even in how they view each other, right? Because we don't like to think that we commoditize people, but we frequently do, right? Like, that's a person that does, and, you know, like, I don't care where my clothes come from. I just want them cheap. And I don't want, you know, like, just, or we might just say, I don't want to think about it. Because it's easier. It's easier to do that than to actually slow down and to rest and confront how the way of Jesus disrupts all of the competing versions and visions of success that are floating around in our heads and our hearts, that are being sold to us as the way. And so Jesus, again, like, gives us a moment to sort of think about it. Right? And it exposes something. But then what Jesus is so gracious in doing here in this moment is later in the Gospel of John, chapter 13, giving them a picture. Giving them not just a sermon, but giving them a picture of what this kind of love and what this kind of life actually looks like. In the first century world, this is not computer relate in our place, you know, where roads are not paved and closed-toed shoes are not so much a thing. Like, your feet get pretty nasty, right? You walk along and you're going from point A to point B, like you get some gunk on your feet. But then you come into a room where we're going to recline and have a meal together. That's a lot of feet. That's right. Like, so even the first century world's like, that's a lot of feet. We're going to do something about this. And one of the things they do about that is have a basin of water and a towel and usually some kind of person at the door of the lowest social standing available to take care and address that problem. It is not something that like the rabbi of the house or the wise sage or the patriarch is supposed to do. And yet, after giving these, you know, sort of this treatise on like, hey, you think that you understand this, but we've got some competing visions here. Like, your head and your heart are in collision about what a picture of life and success look like. So let me give you another picture. So as they enter the room for the Passover meal, Jesus does something that's not conventional for a guy like him to do, and is probably pretty awkward for them, to be honest. He's got a basin and a towel, and he's the one washing the feet of those people, including the people that are going to betray him and turn him over just like he said. Someone in this group named Peter hates this idea and is uncomfortable with it as you might be uncomfortable with it. And it's not because he hates feet. It's because, like, it's a collision with the idea that he actually needs this kind of cleansing. That he actually needs to have this picture of self-giving love reframed for him. John chapter 13, verse 1 says that the reason for this that's going to happen, the thing I'm describing to you, this is described before it happens, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. If we're honest, I think we feel this tension of like, okay, Jesus, this picture of success you're giving us is like, kind of feels like you're holding out on us, particularly when the world doesn't care and is doing whatever it wants. Like, just feels like survival should be the thing. But like this, the conversation that Jesus is trying to usher in, the picture that Jesus is trying to give is rooted in the idea that Jesus loves them till the end. Loves them in a way that many human relationships cannot, even if they're well attended. It loves in a way that even the most well-intentioned church doesn't always get right. loves them in a way that money certainly falls short of, loves them in a way that like our relationship to our own health and building our best life often betrays us. To be able to love them till the end. Jesus is trying in this moment to challenge and cleanse, not just physically, but in their head and in their hearts, this picture of the good life. Right? These competing virtues that say, does the world exist to serve you, or do you see your existence as a way to see the world around you, to serve the world around you, right? To really pay attention to what it is we're serving. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal that's sparked all kinds of conversation. It's actually not an article. It's a research. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. A poll or whatever. Of like the changing values of Americans, and like one of the things that we sort of see being reflected in this particular study is that trust in institutions and trust in country and trust in kids and community, which would have been probably circa the past 50 years, some of the things we would say, like, that's a nice life. That our modern versions are like, nah, that's not it. That's not it. And by the way, I don't have any skin in the game about those four things like really being the thing for you. Just want to show you like they've dove down, but you see what went up? Money. Now, that's weird. What does it point to? Probably the way in which we can buy and build our best life. And you certainly have felt in the past year the ways that falls short and doesn't deliver what it promises. But what may be challenging for you today is just to allow the way of Jesus to disrupt your definitions of safety and security. Miroslav Volf, brilliant thinker, brilliant writer, author, who's lived in many places, has seen many different kinds of things. I would commend you to look him up and his sort of resume of sorts and the life that he's lived. He teaches a course at Yale University called The Life Worth Living. And one of the things he does in this class, he's a Christ follower, but he thinks there's a really great value in studying the truth claims of world religions, but to look also at how those truth claims like enter different spaces in history, right? And so he offered recently on a podcast a reflection on modernity. He offered this reflection on modernity, not speaking to a particular religion or people group or any of that, but just reflecting on our modern like collision with convenience and ourselves. And he says, modern humans are like painters so obsessed over the tools for their art that they never start to paint. Modern humans are like painters so obsessed over the tools for their art that they never start to paint. Like they spend their life like looking for the right and fullest amount of information, find the YouTube videos, find the thinkers, find the influencers, the right amount of money and the right house to do those things and the right car to do those things with. And like we've spent so much time obsessing over the tools to build that best life that most of us never start painting. That's his reflection on modernity. And I think that lands for me more than I really want it to. Like the scarcity thinking that I often enter my day with. Yeah, but I don't have this, and I don't have this, and the people who are successes have that, and I don't have that. And the invitation of Jesus is to let this picture of love, self-giving love, wash over and confront the lesser stories we settle for. So that we don't spend a life worshiping the tools when we were invited to live out a great story. To also reflect on the way that the reality of what Jesus is inviting us to. I just think it's worth noting here that I've mentioned, and maybe you caught this, that I've mentioned Peter, James, and John as disciples by name, okay? And I just want to say something to those of us who maybe, if you live like in my head, like the shame spiral of like, well, I should do better than this. Why? You're right, there should be. The three people in the ministry of Jesus that were the closest with Jesus on his journey, walking and talking with Jesus at this point, are the three people who by name in these two texts that I'm holding in front of you are like confronted with these opportunities to receive the grace and mercy of what Jesus is offering. And I think if you are like me and you tend to just be really discouraged when you don't just get it all right the first time, or man, I've been following Jesus for a number of years, and why do I still think those things? And why do I still pursue that stuff? And why do I still care so much about what that person thinks? You're in pretty good company. You're in pretty good company. Jesus continues to walk with them and give them this picture, but then he also challenges them to think that this is about this way of love being how transformation is going to come into the world, right? The way most of us, what he says in verse 13 of John 13 is he, after washing their feet, including Peter, who's like not down with it, you're never going to wash my feet, then says, okay, wash all of me, if that's what it means to be part of your kingdom. He says this, he says in verse 13, do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them, you call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I've set you as an example that you should do everything as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. You will be blessed if you memorize them, not if you're blessed if you just crack the code in your introspective space and time, but if you begin to put these things into practice. Now, I don't want you to hear that this is an invitation to never take a day off, or never to treat yourself, or to never do something, kind for your family, because you just got to be pouring yourself out for everyone else all the time. I reject the premise that that's what I'm saying to you. But what I'm inviting you to, and what Jesus, I think, is inviting you to, is to move past, the grandiosity of, these massive acts are what God is calling me to do, and to come back to the small beginnings of we are very fragile vessels trying with sometimes good intentions, sometimes not, to bring some intention to, actually living out this way of life. Right? To try to wake up tomorrow and go to a coffee shop and go, okay, this is how I'm going to live, and in light of how I've been loved by God. To go on Zoom calls, camera on or camera off, and go, hey, this is how I'm going to live. How I'm going to serve people or think about people, even if everyone else around me is just doing their own thing and getting theirs. Jane Jacobs writes in the death and life of great American cities extensively about in the 1960s when that book came out, in this obsession with burn it all down, pave it all down, and put up expressways. Her fear and the advocacy work she was doing is that we would miss the little collisions that the barber shop and the grocery store and if I make it modern, the self-checkout line, those things that get created. That the impact that we have for other people and the impact other people have on us. She's saying, hey, if we just pave it all down and focus on building our best lives, we actually lose one of the ways we grow and one of the ways we help others the most. And I think I don't redeem everything in the book or receive everything in the book is this is the way to live, but I think that's an important thing for us to consider. That when we live with great intention, to do as Jesus called us to do, to take this thing that we've received from Jesus and extend it, things that we would never script or expect begin to happen. And you have an impact on people that you never probably even understand. You won't even get a glimpse of what that text meant to someone, or what that tip meant to someone, or what that thank you meant to someone, or what that eye contact meant to somebody. What it sparked in someone's story. But then I think it's just important for us to also think about this as a church, right? To on our 10th birthday, I think in the obsession with convenience and expedience and bigger and better and up and to the right, to remember that some of the best work that God is going to do in and through the city over the next 10 years is not going to come when from this stage we concoct poodles jumping through hoops of fire, which is a phrase I've used for 10 years. Maybe I need to retire it today. It's probably time. Not through like, oh, look at all the excitement on the stage. But when you and I take the things we're wrestling with together in this room, remembering that we're not alone, and we try to move from being the Mark 10 community that's like pointing fingers and posturing and going, well, what gives that guy the right to think that thing? And to move to more of a John 13 community, which is like, how do we wash one another's feet, and how do we wash the feet of the world around us when there's so much nonsense out there? That picture, that John 13 community, is where transformation happens. Close with this story, then we'll move to communion. I did a tour this summer, a walking tour of the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904. It was a Sunday morning. I got to go over to what is now like kind of the Royal, it's not Royal Farms Arena anymore, it's the CFG Bank Arena. I got to go to the CFG Bank Arena, which is kind of like the kind of the ground zero of like the area where the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904 started. If you don't know, it was a really devastating thing for the city, as you can imagine, but miraculously, no lives were lost. But from a business and societal impact, tremendously traumatizing to the city of Baltimore. We get to this one particular part in the walk where the historian is giving us reasons why it was so bad and why it was so hard to put out this fire. And they're rattling them off. They're rattling off like the power lines and the way the cities were just, it made it really difficult for people who were first responders to get up in there, talk about the fire hydrants and the systems that like DC and neighboring jurisdictions bring their hoses in, but their hoses don't hook to our hoses in the city of Baltimore, which was a whole thing that's not, I know we love to like say that Baltimore does terrible things, but like that was a national problem at that time. It wasn't a Baltimore thing, lest we like pile on Baltimore, like it was a national problem. But then she said this, and I think everyone else just kind of kept nodding their head, and it hit me. She was like, one of the things that made the problem a lot worse is that the people were coming out of church and they got in the way of people actually doing the work of response. That all these people like walked out of their church service and heard their songs and sermons and went, oh, ain't it awful? Now, to be fair, right, their livelihoods, their jobs were likely in flames. Their businesses were likely in flames. And yet, like, this freeze up and stand and watch while everyone else is sort of running around. Like, that it slowed down the ability to put out a fire is like, as a pastor, like, I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't unhear it. And I'm like, no one else is shook by that? No one else was shook by that. They were all, yeah, church people. Church people, what can you do? There's a litany of things around us, around the world, that are metaphorically or literally, right? Hurting and being harmed, and may we not be a church that's just so like, that doesn't connect, that the things we do in this room are intended for us to like step out of this room and play a role. And I'm not saying everyone needed to become an armchair firefighter there, but right, even to know like, my job in this moment is to get out of the way. Would have been a start, right? I just want to offer to us, like, as a posture, like, I don't know what the next 10 years hold. I'm sure that there's programs that worked in the last season that we're going to get to this season and go like, I don't know, got to change things up. But what I hope does not mark our community is that in the face of terrible and hard and challenging things going on around us, you will not pop. Like, is that we would not just like be locked in like whatever was the sermon about, like it was a nice sermon. Like that we would not be moved to like step out of our room and live into these things that we're talking about. And if we can get one thing right as a church, maybe the programs are going to come and go, but that as a posture, I think is an invitation for us to receive. Now listen, like, and this is what we got to come back to, and this is where we're going to move now as we consider communion together, is that the way that we get there isn't by you hearing some message that's like, okay, people, knock it off, try harder. Can you stop it? Here's what we need to acknowledge. We have all kinds of competing pictures of success that we're wrestling with. And we come into this room to receive from Jesus an invitation to be reminded that it's the proximity and presence of Jesus entering our story, pouring himself out on our behalf, and actually being powerful enough to deliver on the things that he promises. That's what we're wrestling with in this space today. The invitation is to receive that from Jesus as a fuel to be able to extend that to anybody in or outside of this room. And to remember that if you're wrestling and you're struggling with doubt and you're frustrated and you're struggling, you're not alone in that pursuit. There's 4 stations in the room, and it's just an invitation for us to just kind of reset and bring before Jesus these competing pictures in our head and our heart. These competing postures that say this is where life is found. I want to invite you at this time, after I pray, to receive bread and receive cup and come back to your seat and just to create some space to think about the collision of worlds that marks this past week and how Jesus may want to refresh you, give you space to wrestle, or even some space to remember the invitation that's before you. Let's pray together. God, as we think about the good things that have happened in the past 10 years, as we think about the way your love extends to us, it sort of can become white noise in the burdens and the pressures that we feel for this giving week. So, God, we invite you to this space and time just to encourage, to challenge, and to remind us, both individually and collectively, of where we will find sufficient grace to walk with us in the craziness of living in this world and space. And thanks that when we do that, we're not doing it alone. And thanks for this reminder in communion, both with you and with each other. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.